Okay, thank you to Veronica for inviting me, and thank you for showing up on this hot day. If you're in the New York area, you know it's a hot day. My name is Evan Weiner. I am from Rockland County, New City. For those who are outside the market, is in Rockland County, and I went to high school about 8 miles away from where Veronica is right now. I'm in Westchester County, about 30 miles away from where she is right now. I started in the business of radio and newspapers in 1971 at the age of 15. Joe Dionisio was my English teacher at Spring Valley High School over in Muncie, New York, and he never knew anybody's name. It was student, student, student. To make a long story short, he comes up to me one day in September of 1971 and says, "Student, you got a good voice. Would you like to be on radio?" You know, radio, worst way, worst way. And I was. I was on WRKL along with Eugene Delicio and Doris Chan every Tuesday afternoon, 9-10 on your radio dial, still there in Rockland County, 1,000 watts, broadcasts in Polish now. And we were on every week with Spring Valley Tiger Talk, talking about the high school. More importantly, Joe opened the door for me at the Nyack Journal News, which doesn't bear any resemblance to today's Nyack Journal News except in name, and also the Bergen Record, my first of 3 stints at the Bergen Record, starting in 1971, September 71, and I was a stringer. I called in events at Spring Valley High School, and it was taken by either the Journal News or the Bergen Record, or both. In 1978, March of 1978, I was graduated college. I was 21 years old, and I'm back in Rockland County working for WGRC Radio in Nanuet, New York, about 2 miles from the library, near the bakery. And Steve North is my boss. He hires me in January of 1978, says, you got to go out, you have to cover things on Saturday, not a problem. Among the things I covered on Saturday initially, Ralph Nader at Rockland Community College, Julian Bond at Rockland Community College. But we're in March of 1978, and Steve says, you have to go out, and you have to, I want you to go cover the Democratic fundraiser at the Nyack, at the Tappan Zee Townhouse. I said, sure. I said, don't worry about it. It's Saturday. Just have something for Monday morning. Fine, no problem with that. So I go there, and I'm 21, so I got this big, bushy hairdo and all that other stuff that you have when you're 21. And I walk in, and in walks in this obscure New York assemblyman by the name of Gerald Nadler. You might have heard of Gerald Nadler. Also walks in was the guy who's running for lieutenant governor at the time, Mario Cuomo, with his 19-year-old son, Andrew, and his 9-year-old son, Chris, and Matilda all walking in, along with Hugh Carey running for governor, along with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the New York senator, and then this tall fellow. He's like 6'4", really good looking, sandy, blondish hair, walks straight over to me and he says, I like you. Like me? Oh, introduce me, you know, never introduced himself. But I knew who he was because I watched Batman, and he was the mayor of Gotham City. It was John Lindsay, and John Lindsay told me that he was running for Senate, 1980, state of New York, 2 years down the road. And I had my scoop, first scoop ever, 21. Run back to my radio station, file it there, file it with AP, file it with UPI, and then WNEW radio calls me. Henry Marcotte says, we'd like for you to do that story. I said, sure. How much you paying me? $10, sold. And with that, I was on WNEW between 1978 and 1981 as a stringer. Among the stories I covered for them was an exclusive interview with Ronald Reagan in January of 1980. And the Brinks robbery in Nyack, New York, which was the last story I covered for them in 1981, October of 1981. You probably know who that guy is. Yogi Berra, Lawrence Peter Berra. And in the 1950s and 1960s, he was all over television. Baseball and the American culture. We're not going to talk about the game at all, but we're going to talk about characters in the culture. And I used to speak regularly at the Yogi Berra Museum at Montclair State University. And I did it for about 6 years. And Yogi would come to every one of my talks. And after the talks that he went to, he did the same thing, pat me on the back, said, good job, kid, good job, kid. And I took that as the highest compliment, because here is Yogi Berra telling you, good job, kid. But I miss Yogi. Yogi, I used to go to the museum just to hang out with him, or bring people with me just to hang out with Yogi. And he would tell some stories, but people would just genuflect because it was Yogi Berra. Yogi was a major part of the American culture. And he was a major part of the American culture in 1954 when the French philosopher Jacques Barzun noted, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And the best part of learning baseball is not going to Major League games, but going to industrial league games, see small town teams in the minor leagues, or better yet, go to a high school game, because that's where America, you'll learn a lot about America at those games. And baseball and the culture, you got Casey at the bat. This is a slide from a Walt Disney cartoon in the 1940s. Casey at the bat, written by Ernest Thayer. Ernest Thayer and I have something in common, believe it or not. He was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1866 and 1888. I was a columnist for a few stories in the 21st century. So it's the 19th century for Thayer, 21st century for me. And he prints this, this poem, Casey at the Bat, on June 3rd, 1888. No author's credit on it. I don't know if he was ashamed of it or just churned it out like we all do as journalists. We just churn out product, some of it better than others, some of it just the throwaway, but he just churned that out, no author's credit. 7 years later, he's at a Harvard class reunion, and he finally reads the poem, which already by 1895 is famous and is in the culture. And it's in the culture because of this guy, DeWolf Hopper. Heather Hopper, if you know the actress and gossip columnist, that's her father. And he was an actor back in the 1870s, the 1880s. And he took a look at Casey at the Bat and said, that's mine. I'm going to do something with that. And yes, he did something with it. It became a vaudeville act. Hopper performs it for the first time on August 14th, 1888, about 9 weeks after it's printed. It is estimated that Hopper performed the poem on vaudeville stages, on burlesque stages, in recording rooms, a studio, or on silent or on film, silent movies, more than 10,000 times. I was in 4th grade. I had Miss Alexander, PS 151, Woodside, Queens, 4th grade. Miss Alexander was about 138 years old at the time. Well, actually, she wasn't. She was probably about 65. She had the requisite blue hair, the white blouse, the blue skirt, the tissue stuck in her sleeve here in case her nose ran. And she gave us an assignment. What was Casey at the Bat all about? What was it all about? Me, I'm 7, 8 years old. Man, he's a lousy baseball player. Struck out with the bases loaded. No joy in Mudville that day. Mighty Casey had struck out. Of course, Miss Alexander said, wrong, 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 wrong. It's about man's failures. We really don't know what it's about. We don't even know who Casey was. Was he King Kong Kelly, who played in New England? Or was it some guy in Stockton, California? In Stockton, they claim Casey is theirs. In fact, there is a minor league team there. There will be a minor league team in 2021, as there is no minor league baseball being played now because of the pandemic. And it's called the Mudville Nine. No joy in Mudville. The mighty Casey has struck out. It was just the poem. Nothing to analyze. But it was in schools for a very long time. And there was a woman in New Jersey who came to one of my talks about 2 years ago on baseball who says that for her talent show, she still has kids performing Casey at the Bat because she's a baseball fan. Chances are, if you listened in the 1890s to a recording of Casey at the Bat, you heard it on something that looked like that. That was a record player of the 1890s. That's the Springfield, New Jersey library, and there's a little room, sort of a, it's not a Hall of Fame room, it's not quite a museum room, but apparently the story is there was a hermit who lived in Springfield, New Jersey, didn't have any family or anything. When he passed away, he had all this junk that was not really junk in his house. And so somebody decided, let's give it to the library. And at the library, they played that thing for me. That thing actually works. They have these big cylinders, put it in there, and you can hear John Philip Sousa's marches on the cylinders they happen to own. But in the 1890s, you might have been able to hear Casey at the Bat on one of those things because this guy, Russell Hunting, recorded it. Russell Hunting actually recorded it twice, once in 1893 and then again in 1898 on those big cylinders. He was an entertainer and a sound recordist, and both times he used the heavy Irish brogue. In 1905, Thomas Edison got John Kaiser to come into his studios down in New Jersey, and he records it for Thomas Edison. And Hopper's version is recorded for Victor. I don't know if Nipper the dog was there at that point, his master's voice. Remember Nipper the dog? But that doesn't come out until 1906. Chances are you actually heard, whether it was on the Edison label or the Victor label, you might have heard the Casey at the Bat rendition on one of these phonographs. This is actually Sagway in Quebec last October. I was on a cruise speaking, and this guy, I just walked into his garage, and I'm just looking around. It's like junk paradise, but it's in actually working shape, real working shape, and that thing actually works. If you put a record on there and you crank it up, you could listen to a record, and that's how you might have listened to records in the 19-teens or so, or Casey at the Bat. Hopper would put it to film, a short subject, a silent film in 1927. Wallace Peery, also a silent film in 1927. Bob Hope's second banana, Jerry Kalana, who was Bob Hope's sidekick, recorded it for a rendition of a Disney cartoon. In 1946, Jackie Gleason performed it on the TV show he had in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Doug McGraw, and others voiced the poem in orchestral settings. One of those settings in Tampa, featuring George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin doing Casey at the Bat, raising money for the Police Benevolent Association of Tampa. I'm not even sure if Billy was the manager at that time or if he was in between jobs at that time with George, but they were down there raising money for the PBA. Now, if we were in person, I would be asking you this question. Does this sign mean anything to you? And if you have any answers, go ahead. I'll let you answer it. That's one of the limitations of Zoom. But ball game today at the Polo Grounds. Does that mean anything to you? Yes, no, maybe? Well, it meant something to a guy by the name of Jack Norworth. Jack Norworth was a musician, and he wrote music with his partner, Albert Montilzer. And he's looking at the sign because he is on the subway. And he's looking at the sign. I'm not sure if Dr. Zinsmore had his acne cures in those days. It seemed like every time we went in the subway, it was 15 Dr. Zinsmore ads in every car. But anyway, he's looking up ball game today at the Polo Grounds. Ball game today at the Polo Grounds, 1907, 1908. And he's got an idea in his head. He is going to write a baseball song, and he talks to Albert Montilzer about it, and they come up with a song. The song, well, it's Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And Harry Carey, when he was the announcer for the Chicago Cubs before he passed away in the 1980s and 1990s, which you don't see here, is Harry singing along with his 6 best friends in the world, 6 guys named Bud. Harry supported the sponsor, Budweiser beer, and he sung it really badly. It was in between the top of the 7th and bottom of the 7th inning at Wrigley Field. He would sing it, and then they'd bring guests in to sing it with the whole idea you got to sing it really badly like Harry did, and that's a tradition that goes on through this day. Now, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to pull that off in 2020 since nobody is supposed to be at the ballpark, and even the announcers may not be at the ballpark. The last I heard, when the season starts this week, at least Yankee games, they were down in Washington, that they're going to be in the studio, they being Susan and John on the radio side, and Michael Kay and whoever else on the TV side will be in Stamford, Connecticut. I know the Mets had Wayne do the game at the Yankee Met game, preseason game at the stadium with Howie Rose at home. So I'm not sure how they're going to handle that this year, but they'll figure that out. Anyway, the song's written in 1908. Norwith and Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game, but the song would become famous on the vaudeville stage. Now, what's the song about? Well, take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I'll ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. There's a lot more to that song than meets the eye. Now, Norwith might have had a girlfriend prior to getting married who liked baseball or was a woman's liber suffragette back then. Women didn't go to baseball games back in those days. It just didn't go to baseball games in those days. Very few. But Von Tilzer and Norwith come up with this woman, Katie Casey. Not sure if she's from Brooklyn. Not sure if she's from Manhattan. But if she sees a game, say, at the Polo Grounds, she's probably a New York Giants fan. And she's with her boyfriend or her husband or just a friend. We're not sure who she is. And they're going to go out and enjoy themselves for the day. Baseball games used to start at 3 o'clock in those days. So they're going to enjoy themselves for the day. And they're going back and forth. What should we do? And she suggests, let's go out to a baseball game. Women didn't suggest that in 1908. And the boyfriend, no, no, no. Yes, 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 I want to go. I want to go to the baseball game. No, no, no. Suddenly she can't take it anymore. And she starts yelling, take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. We don't know if they ever did go to the baseball game. Maybe she did on her own. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the two of them went together, or they ditched the idea totally. But in the third stanza, after you take me out to the ball game, we learn a little bit about Katie Casey. Well, we learned a little bit about Katie Casey in the first part, in that she had the baseball bug. She had the fever. She was a real fan. And then in the third part, we find out she is really a fan, to the point where she knows all the players. Players didn't wear numbers on their back or names on their back then. She knows them all. And she knows how to get them going. Now, it's a song, so we assume she knows how to get them going by giving them a rousing cheer. But then again, she might have been, I don't know, she might have been in Bull Durham as well. We don't know that. We can make assumptions because she knows all of the players. So the song is made famous on the vaudeville stage by Nora Bayes, who's Norwith's wife. She's popularized it along with Shine On Harvest Moon. In 1908, the song is written. It is the only song under normal circumstances, that tens of millions of people hear every year from February until nearly November. Take me out to the ball game. Now, Take Me Out to the Ball Game was not played in a baseball stadium, Major League Baseball stadium, until 1934 at the 1934 World Series between the Detroit Tigers and the St. Louis Cardinals. Oddly enough, Norwith never saw a baseball game until 1928, 20 years after he helped write the song. Von Tilzer would not see a baseball game until 1940, 32 years after he wrote the song. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was one of the first artifacts not connected to baseball that was enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. The song took on a life of its own. In Night at the Opera, the Marx Brothers movie, where Groucho and Margaret Dumont go over to Italy to find the world's greatest tenor to perform at the theater where Margaret Dumont is the main patron. She wants the guy there. Groucho, of course, runs into Chico and to Harpo, and they have a singer, and he brings that singer back. They're all stowaways, and remember the stowaway scene, if you're familiar with the movie. And they get to the theater and they got to figure out what to do to get rid of the real singer to put in Kitty Carlisle, played the love lead in here in 1936, her boyfriend, who is going to be inserted in the movie. Harpo and Chico bring the music sheet, take me out to the ball game and give it to all the musicians. They're playing the overture, and all of a sudden they break in to take me out to the ball game. Groucho jumps from the box, and he's got peanuts and Cracker Jacks that he's selling. Peanuts, Cracker Jacks, all in the song. So the song did take on a life of its own with Night at the Opera. Harpo would return to the song on an I Love Lucy episode in 1955. It was shown in numerous movies and television shows. And 112 years later, it remains the most popular song or most played song from the American Songbook of 1908. It's still played 112 years later. Now, that is Abbott and Costello. Bud Abbott on the left, St. Louis Wolves, and Lou Costello on the right. And that is the famous routine. Who's on first? What's on second? Oddly enough, that routine comes out of a vaudeville style or a burlesque style called rounders. Now, if you really, really look at the history of baseball, not the fabricated history of baseball that started in 1839 in Cooperstown with after Doubleday, but what we think is the evolution of baseball. Baseball was played as early as the 1790s, according to a museum in North Adams, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, that there was a local team playing baseball. Baseball comes out of an English game called rounders. This comedy style, Abbott and Costello, in this particular routine, is called rounders. Rounders was a very common comedy style back then. You had the straight man, or actually the wise guy in this case being Bud Abbott, and you have the stooge, or the idiot, Lou Costello. And Lou Costello, as the stooge, is supposed to keep asking questions, and the straight man just gives these answers. And the stooge doesn't like the answers. For instance, who gets paid every month? Yeah, I'm asking you, who gets paid every month? Well, sometimes we send it to Mrs. Who, and it goes on and on and on, which is why it's called rounders. Now, Abbott and Costello met on the burlesque circuit. There were actually two burlesque circuits. B-U-R-L-E-S-Q-U-E is family burlesque. B-U-R-L-E-S-K is where the women take off their clothes. They meet on the burlesque circuit. Now, there is some thought that Abbott did a baseball-related rounders routine in the 1920s before he met Costello. Nobody really knows who wrote this, but a guy by the name of Mike Musto, that's the guy that most people think wrote this routine and didn't go anywhere with the routine. It's like Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis stole all of his stuff, or at least when he got together with Dean Martin, from what he saw up in the Catskills in the Borscht Belt. Martin played the straight man. Jerry would play, in his case, what he called himself as the monkey. And very common style in those days, and oddly enough, it's a baseball routine, and it's rounders. Now, the question is, did Musto ever get money from Abbott and Costello? And John Joseph, who's a comedian, and Alan King was his mentor, and I know John. John on cruise ships, when he was partnering with a guy by the name of Johnny B, would do a version of this, but a rock version of it. And he actually said to me, you ought to do this baseball talk, because you know a lot of these stories. So he said, of course, Mike Musto got money from that, probably $15. And my other friend, Max Docelli, another comedian, who broke in with Seinfeld and Larry David and Carol Leifler and Paul Reiser, all that group in the late 1970s at Carowinds. So of course they stole it. We're comedians. We borrow material. He's got a great story about Rodney Dangerfield, as George Schultz gave Rodney the line. I'm quoting, I'm opening a comedy club, George Schultz. And he said that, once you take my line, I get no respect. And he did. And the rest was history. One of America's classic routines, maybe the most classic American routine. Who's on first? It was a vaudeville act from a common style called rounders. Did Abbott and Costello pay Mike Musto the $15 for the routine? Not known. Was it a baseball burlesque routine? Maybe. It's been suggested that Abbott did the routine before meeting Costello on the burlesque circuit, but this is what we know. They did get a copy or did get hold of the routine about 1936, worked with John Grant, who is Costello's writer, and Will Glickman, got it perfected, and premiered the routine on the Keith Smith Show on CBS in March of 1938. It was a smash. It put Abbott and Costello on the map. Again, the rest is history there. They go on from the show into movies. They do another routine which becomes rather famous, Niagara Falls. Slowly I turn step by step. But Abbott and Costello, this is their routine forever. And they would end up performing for Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, in Dwight Eisenhower at the White House. They performed it in movies, on radio, and TV. And because of that, Abbott and Costello were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame. And you go up to Cooperstown when it's open. I think it's open now. I'm not too sure about, I know they're in phase 4 up in Cooperstown, but I'm not sure if the museum is open yet. Anyway, if you are able to go, when you're able to go to Cooperstown, there is an exhibit with Abbott and Costello and some others, and there's a constant loop of who's on first, what's on second. Now, that question of who's on first that bothered people for years and years and years and years and years, until about 12 years ago. Vin Scully is the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer. Vin Scully started with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1950. He was at Fordham University. And he looks at his monitor. He's doing TV. He looks at his monitor, and he sees this picture. And he looks at the picture, and he says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. Who? South Korean player by the name of Who, playing for the Dodgers, is on first. And in the Korean League, Korean baseball right now in South Korea, there is a player by the name of Who gets on first base, but who's on first is not a big deal in South Korea. Not the way it was when I was a kid. And I'm not sure how big a deal who's on first is today. But it was a classic comedy routine. And by the way, there was also a Watt who's on first, Watt's on second. There was a player by the name of Watt who precedes the routine, who played with the Washington Senators in the 1920s, who played second base. Meanwhile, I am quite certain there has never been a third baseman called I don't give a darn. A couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago now, my wife and I decided that we needed to see Franklin and Eleanor at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library. I needed, because I do other talks. I do a talk on the 1936 Olympics. I do a talk on 1939 in television. And Franklin Roosevelt was the first person on TV in 1939. So I wanted to know, or first person in the United States on TV in 1939. So I wanted to know about that. I wanted to know why the Americans didn't boycott the Hitler Olympics, the Berlin Summer Games 1936. And I also wanted to know what happened after Pearl Harbor and what happened with baseball after Pearl Harbor, because in 1918, the season was cut short by a month during World War I. And the Boston Red Sox and the American League owners didn't want to play after September 1st. The National Leaguers did, and it was a good thing for the Red Sox because they won the World Series in 1918. They were kind of forced to play the World Series. Anyway, I want to know about the green light letter. World War II for the Americans starts on December 7th, 1941. The Americans had stayed out of the war for more than 2 years, but got involved in the war. And this guy here, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, Judge Landis, writes a letter to Franklin Roosevelt saying, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Roosevelt sends him back a letter. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5. Remember, Franklin died in 1945. Baseball games didn't have all those commercials. It used to be 2.5 hours. The longest games, 2.5 hours. And which can be got for very little cost. In 1945, Franklin's been dead for 75 years. $800 or so for box seats to Yankee games today. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. There were blackouts at night, but this was the summer. And in places like Detroit, it didn't get dark until 9 o'clock at night. Some teams had lights, some teams didn't have lights. But Roosevelt said, go ahead. I once asked Dan Rooney, who was the owner of Pittsburgh Steelers, about the green light letter, and he said, we in the National Football League took it as the okay for us to play, and so did the other sports. Keep sports going. Roosevelt said, okay to baseball. Baseball was the king of sports in the 1940s and the 50s. So if he says good to baseball, we were all good to go. In Pittsburgh, had a team in 1942 in the National Football League, and then combined teams in 1943 and 44, first with the Chicago Cardinals, rather with the Philadelphia Eagles, because Philadelphia Navy Yard, there was no Navy Yard or Army base near Pittsburgh, so in order to field the team, they had to combine with somebody, and then in 44 with the Chicago Cardinals because of the Navy Yards on Lake Michigan. Babe Ruth. He's in 10 movies. Guess who he played in almost all the movies? A baseball star. Babe Ruth, between 1920 and 1940, 10 movies. Silent movie called Heading Home starred Babe Ruth as, guess what? A baseball star. He starred in the 1927 silent movie, Babe Comes Home. There are no prints available for that. They all dissolved and deteriorated over the years. He was not himself in terms of being in a baseball uniform, but he appeared in a cameo role in the 1928 Harold Lloyd silent movie called Speedy, which is a great movie and remembered simply because Harold Lloyd was hanging from a clock. He used to have clocks on buildings. He was hanging from one of the arms of the clocks. Ruth altogether was in 10 movies. The last one he was in, The Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story. But the first guy who gained any kind of fame, jumping from the baseball field onto the boards or into the movies, was a guy by the name of Mike Donlin, who played with the New York Giants. And he was known as the baseball idol of Manhattan, or the matinee idol of Manhattan. He was a pretty good player. He hit .333 during the dead ball era, but he left the game quite a few times to perform on stage in vaudeville because the money was better on stage in vaudeville than baseball. He retired for good in 1914, and he went right into the movies. May have been in as many as 53 movies. And his first movie, he's totally typecast immediately, right off the bat. And that featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw, who was also no stranger to being on film. Donlin was a movie star, so to speak, in the silent movies. Lou Gehrig, 1938, he's in the movie called Rawhide. It's kind of a stupid plot. Lou Gehrig is tired of playing baseball, and he decides he's going to give it all. He's going to get away from everything. He's happy. No more baseball. The movie starts with Gehrig in Grand Central Terminal giving a news conference announcing that he's retiring from the New York Yankees and that he's headed off to Montana, that he and his sister, this guy's married at the time, but he and his sister are off to Montana, and they bought this ranch where he can relax for the rest of his life in solitude. The movie called Rawhide really didn't go anywhere. It's a terrible movie. But something interesting about this movie. Lou Gehrig was diagnosed with ALS in 1939. And the doctors who were looking at him with his disease were able, there were some videos of Gehrig around because of Fox Tone News and all, but it's just playing baseball, him hitting, basically, that's it. But in this movie, you got to see Lou Gehrig move around and move around and move around. And the doctors were able to figure out, they knew when the movie was shot, how quickly the ALS was ravaging his body by watching that movie after he's diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic in 1939. So the movie was instructional for the doctors in some ways. And Gehrig wasn't the only Yankee star that did something for the medical profession or for people, although his was different. Babe Ruth was one of the first people in the world to get chemotherapy. That was in 1947-48. The film opened in Grand Central Terminal. He's gone. He's going to relax in solitude and turn his back on baseball forever. The Lou Gehrig story. Cartoons. My all-time hero, Bugs Bunny. I learned so much from Bugs Bunny cartoons. I learned to heckle, which he's doing to the Gas House Gorillas in this. I learned classical music. I learned a lot from Bugs Bunny and Warner Brothers cartoons. This particular cartoon taking place at the Polo Grounds because people who wrote the stories were from New York. Bugs is heckling the Gas House Gorillas who are beating the teetotalers. And he said, I'll murder these guys. I could beat them with one hand behind my back. Well, they challenged Bugs Bunny, and ultimately Bugs Bunny would win the game, beating the Gas House Gorillas. Not the only cartoon character to play baseball, obviously. Some of the movies, League of Their Own. That's Madonna being held up by Rosie O'Donnell. Gina Davis is in the back with the catching stuff on, the chest protector. Jimmy Fox was the model of the manager, played by Tom Hanks. Digress here for a second. I know somebody who knows Jim Lovell, who's the lead astronaut on Apollo 13 and the Apollo 13 movie with Ron Howard. And Tom Hanks, of course, was in this movie. And my friend was telling me, who knows Lovell rather well, they did media on the movie, and the number one asked question of Lovell wasn't about Apollo 13. It was Tom Hanks a nice guy? Lovell said yes. The guy who was the technical director of this movie is a guy named Casey Candell, who I knew. His mother actually played in this league, which lasted from, say, 1943 to 1951, was underwritten by Phil Wrigley, played mostly in the Midwest. Wrigley got out of it eventually. But it was a professional league featuring women playing baseball, and the League of Their Own. And Casey was there. His mother played in the league, and because his mother played in the league, he wanted to make sure that everything was as authentic as it got. And if you remember Tom Hanks' famous line in the movie, "There's no crying in baseball." League of Their Own. Gary Cooper, as Lou Gehrig in The Pride of the Yankees. Cooper was right-handed and never played baseball. So he had to take a quick course in playing baseball. It kind of looked like Gehrig, and he was right-handed. So all the scenes with Gehrig, with Cooper portraying Gehrig was done with a mirror because Lou Gehrig was left-handed, Gary Cooper right-handed. That is Bull Durham. That's Tim Robbins on the left and Kevin Costner on the right. Written by Ron Shelton. It's about a catcher who never made it to the major leagues, Crash Davis, who's trying to get inside the head of Newt Lelouch. And he's got the $1 million arm and the 25-cent head. And of course, Susan Sarandon is the love interest for Crash Davis. And also Tim Robbins in the movie. And she is a baseball Annie. That's what she is. And that's the movie, Bull Durham. Kevin Costner did a bunch of sports movies, another baseball movie as well. Jerry Lewis here in 1958-59 after the Dodgers franchise was moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. This is the Geisha boy who's using Dodger players in the film. Robert Redford in The Natural, shot in Buffalo at the Rock, at the Rock Pile, War Memorial Stadium. Costner again, Field of Dreams, talking to Joe Jackson, who appears out of the cornfield. And, there is Costner in this movie. Billy Bean being portrayed here by Brad Pitt. Michael Lewis's Moneyball. Billy Bean will tell you he is the smartest guy in baseball with the Oakland A's. Walter Matthau In Bad News Bears. Walter Matthau never did anything bad on film. And this time he's the coach of the Little League team, the Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bail Bonds. Walter Matthau, who did 3 roles with Jack Lemmon, all the same, in Fortune Cookie, The Odd Couple, and Grumpy Old Men. Great actor, just great actor. And there's a picture, I know Milton Berle's illegitimate son, Bob Williams, who reconciled with Milton. And there's a bus one day going to Dodger Stadium. There's Walter Matthau, there's Bob Hope, there's Dean Martin, and they're all in their Dodger hats and all going out to see a Dodger game. Major League 2, Charlie Sheen, about the Cleveland Indians. Indians' Chief Wahoo logo is gone, and the Indians' name may be gone shortly. Yesterday, Indians players met with Paul Dolan, who is the owner, one of the owners of the team, about maybe it's time to get rid of the name Indians. So some of the movies, Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield. That was Bing Crosby's idea to do that in Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, simply because he was part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time. Bob Hope was part owner of the Cleveland Indians also. This is the late 40s into the 50s. Danny Kaye was part owner of the Seattle Mariners, 1977. Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball, just some of the movies that were made with a baseball theme in mind. Homer Simpson. Here's where I asked the audience about Homer Simpson. Baseball Hall of Famer, yes or no? And you can leave your answer in the chat box if you want, and you could leave the answer there, and I will get back to you when the appropriate time comes. But think about this. Is Homer Simpson in baseball's Hall of Fame, yes or no? Some of the TV shows. There is a smiling Sandy Koufax with Wilbur Post and Mr. Egg. I'm not sure who the autograph is going to, whether it's going to Wilbur Post, Alan Young, the actor, or Mr. Ed. But Mr. Ed tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Herman Munster with Leo DeRocher. In one of the episodes of the Munsters, Herman Munster, who is the All-American father, is hitting lazy fly balls to his son, Eddie Wolfgang Munster, in a park near 1313 Mockingbird Lane, where they live. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, pops Leo DeRocher. Now, if this is the morning, you know that this is all fantasy, because Leo, unless his team was playing a day game, Leo was never up in the morning. But comes out, sees Herman, right away signs Herman to a contract, which he couldn't because he's a Dodger third base coach. He could bring him in, but couldn't sign. And Herman goes and tries out for the Dodgers. Great hitter, liability on the base paths, liability on the field, because if he collided with somebody being 6'7", 540 pounds, chances are that other guy was injured. So the Dodgers forced to cut him. In that show later on, Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, general manager of the National Football League's Los Angeles Rams, comes out of that same patch, the park, sees Herman punting, playing football with his son, tries to offer him a contract. Leo comes running out. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You'll be sorry, you'll be sorry. He never did sign with the Rams, but Leo is on the Munsters. Those two guys, one of those guys on the right is Jim Lefevre, Frenchie Lefevre. Rather, he's on the left, Frenchie Lefevre, who I knew. Al Ferrara is on the right. Al Ferrara, Brooklyn, New York, said that he finally knew he made it to the major leagues because his picture was on a baseball card. Anyway, they're playing headhunters, and they're about ready to cook Gilligan because they want to eat him and keep his head. I once asked Jim Lefevre, you know, you visited there. The Harlem Globetrotters visited there. They had so many visitors. How come they were never found? And Lefevre just was dumbfounded by the whole thing. He said, you know, I never thought of that. They never found the 7 castaways, even though people visited them all the time. I guess they just never told anybody there were 7 stranded castaways on Gilligan's Island. Johnny Roseboro, the Dodger catcher, was on Dragnet. Walter O'Malley appeared with the Rifleman star, and one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in a 1965 episode of Branded. Willie Davis acted, the Dodgers center fielder, acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, Jerry, of course, doing the Geisha Boy with the LA Dodgers, and The Flying Nun. Roseborough appeared in Dragnet 1968, not 66, it wasn't on. Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. Baseball players were on TV shows. Baseball in the culture, baseball in the American culture. And that guy on the left is Phil Silvers. This is another time where if I'm live, I kind of ask the audience, tell me who that is, but we're on Zoom. So next time I do this live, if it's in the New City Library, I will ask the question. But that's Phil Silvers on the left. Do you know who's on the right? Do you know who's on the right? And he's also wearing in LA. They're both wearing Los Angeles hats. This is the 1950s. They're both wearing Los Angeles hats because in Los Angeles until 1957, there was no Major League Baseball. There was the Hollywood Stars Pacific Coast League team and the Los Angeles Angels Pacific Coast League team. And the guy who is to Phil Silver's left, your right, is Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko was a baseball player whose great years were in the Pacific Coast League. His not so good years were in Major League Baseball. He hit home runs, but he couldn't hit for an average, and he would eventually eat himself out of the major leagues. He did finish up with the American League expansion team, the Los Angeles Angels, in 1961. The story here is that the Bilko Show, You'll Never Get Rich, the Phil Silver Show, or the Bilko Show, that Ned Hiken, who was the chief writer for the Bilko Show, was looking around because he wanted a name for his title character, and he saw Steve Bilko playing baseball, and that was it. That's where I got my name. And of course, Bilko, Ernie Bilko, who was a sergeant at Fort Baxter in Kansas, was trying to bilk everybody all the time, getting one past somebody. Yogi Berra was on that show. My first Yogi story here. Now, I'm talking to Yogi one day. I said, you were on the Phil Silver Show. Yeah. I said, what were the Yankees doing, him and his teammates, in Kansas? He said, no, we're in the Bronx. I said, yeah, I know you shot the film off the Bronx Expressway when the studio was there. I know where you shot the show. But what were you doing in Kansas? Why did Yankee players going through Kansas? No, we went through the Bronx. I drove across the George Washington Bridge, got 2 exits down, got off, we went to the studio. And at that point, I realized, no, Yogi's right. They were in the Bronx. They were not in Kansas. Hiken went on to do Car 54 with Gunther Tootie and Francis Muldoon. And Gunther Tootie's favorite player, Car 54 with the New York Yankees, was Yogi Berra. Donna Reed, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, The Munsters, Phil Silvers, some of the TV shows that baseball players were on. And that's Bob Uecker, who I've known Ukes for over 30 years now. He's now in baseball's Hall of Fame. And by the way, the guy who had the highest lifetime batting average off Sandy Koufax was Bob Uecker, who was a 200 hitter. But anyway, Bob Uecker is in baseball's Hall of Fame, broadcaster. And here he is with Johnny Carson. And to make a story really fast, he's playing probably with the Atlanta Braves at this point, and he's trying to make it as a stand-up comic. And he's in New Orleans, and he's performing at a club. Al Hurt, the trumpet player, walks in, sees Uecker, thinks he's the funniest guy he's ever saw, gives Johnny Carson a call, says, you got to get this guy on the show. Johnny takes his word for it. And Uecker does his routine. Johnny calls him to the chair. You're called to the chair. You made it. And they start talking. And in the break, Uecker once told me, Carson said to him, is it true that you're a baseball player? And he said, well, they gave me a uniform and I'm on the card, so I guess I am. And Bob Uecker would go on to the Mr. Belvedere show in the 1980s on ABC. And his co-star was Joanna Kearns. whose sister is a friend of mine by the name of Donna Deverona, who won 2 gold medals in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics swimming, and she's up in Fairfield County, and she is helping with some other talks I've done, Title IX particularly. So Bob Euchre was in Mr. Belvedere, and he wrote a book, and he was in the Miller Beer, Miller Lite commercials as well. Very funny guy, very, very funny guy. Broadway, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Damn Yankees, Joe Hardy, Washington Senators player, sells his soul to the devil. Why? Because he wants to beat those damn Yankees. It's about 1954-55. Washington finally won the World Series in 2019. Totally different franchise. I'm not sure why people were really upset with the Washington franchise in the 50s. They had won a World Series in 1933. But the Yankees winning and winning and winning and winning and winning, and everybody's envious of them. Still to this day, they're envious of them, and this play is on Broadway. Jerry Lewis actually played the devil in one of the incarnations of Damn Yankees. Joe Hardy sells his soul so Washington can win. And the other big song in that play, You Gotta Have Heart. And You Gotta Have Heart would come back in 1969. There's Ed on our shoot tonight. Now I'm going to tell you something you don't know about me. Jerry Stiller is my cousin, was my cousin. He passed away a little while ago. Stiller and Merritt were on the show about 36, 38 times. And when I do my TV talk, I talk about Sullivan through the eyes of Jerry Stiller, because he knew him, because they were always on the show. Ed started his career as a sports writer with the New York Daily News in the 1920s, and was also the ring announcer for boxing's Golden Gloves, the amateur event at Madison Square Garden. So they dropped the microphone here, and they'd say, in that corner is so-and-so, that corner is so-and-so. And when you used to watch the Ed Sullivan Show, you watched the boxing ring announcer. But he was very happy to have the amazing Mets on. Why is he happy to have the amazing Mets on? Well, they won the World Series, and they sing the song, You've Got to Have Heart. And in the front row there is Art Shamsky, who's still around the New York area. He's got the double-breasted suit on with all the buttons. And next to him, one of my favorite people, Ron Swoboda. Ron Swoboda was one of the great storytellers of all time, one of my favorite people to sit around and just talk to. I'm looking for Tug McGraw in there, and I see him in the third row. Seaver is at the end of second row, rather. Seaver is at the end of the second row on the right. So 4 guys in is Tug McGraw. And that brings up the Peggy Lee song, Is That All There Is? Lieber and Stoller. And Tug once said to me, do you know what they call my fastball? I said, no. He says, is that all there is? Is that all there is? Tug McGraw, one of my favorite people. Jerry, speaking of Jerry Stiller, my cousin, whose father, Bill, lived at Bader's in Spring Valley in the retirement home till his demise at the age of 101. Jerry was, of course, on the show, the Seinfeld show, playing Frank Costanza, George Costanza's father. And the real George Steinbrenner really loved this show. So much so that I'm going to let you in on a little secret that either Rick Cerrone or Dave Zen told me, or maybe it was Joe Safety, it's one of them, that some of the scripts came from, or script ideas came from George himself. And here are 3 of the storylines suggested by George. Missing George. George Costanza is missing. And this basically is a story about a guy who worked for American Ship in Tampa. George was always at American Ship, he owned the company. And he thought one of these guys was a little too cozy with some bad guys, and I guess he was a gambler as well. And he was kind of worried about his safety. So the guy takes off for a couple of days, leaves his car behind. George comes to work on Monday morning, and the car is there. And George right away is looking to see if this guy is around. He's not there. Nobody's heard from him. And there's an all points bulletin that goes out to the Tampa police. Turns out the guy went away for a couple of days. They made a story out of that. The best part of this story is that George Steinbrenner, or the actor portraying George Steinbrenner physically, and Larry David doing the voice, knocks on the door, and Frank Costanza, Jerry Stiller, Frank Costanza, opens the door, and he says, well, Mr. Costanza, your son, we think he's dead. And Jerry, as Frank Costanza looks at him, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You did that? And he did. That was a terrible trade for the Yankees. Jay Buhner had a pretty good career with Seattle, and Ken Phelps is awful. Boardroom meeting. Now, if you knew George, your food was his food. And George loved food. He loved food. And there's a meeting at Yankee Stadium. Somebody brings something in, and George says, what are you eating? And he said, where'd you get it? Got it down the street. The whole board meeting moves to the restaurant near Yankee Stadium. And there was a show about that. He tried different uniforms for the Tampa Yankees in Class A baseball, different uniforms. And that became a show. George Steinbrenner suggested storylines. And they even said, hey, you know what? We probably should have George on the show, the real George. And they tried out the scene with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and it was terrible. You could go up on YouTube and see it, because George is not playing George. George is playing some actor, or George thinks he's some actor playing George Steinbrenner. I knew George. I knew him from about 1982 to about 2005 or so. And I knew all aspects of George. I knew the Saturday Night Live George when he was on NBC, Saturday Night Live, when they did the skit. Pitching George Steinbrenner, catching George Steinbrenner, first base George Steinbrenner, second base George Steinbrenner, shortstop George Steinbrenner, third base George Steinbrenner, left field George Steinbrenner, center field George Steinbrenner, right field George Steinbrenner, designated hitter George Steinbrenner, manager George Steinbrenner, third base coach George Steinbrenner, general manager George Steinbrenner, owner George Steinbrenner. George was involved in every aspect of the New York Yankees. But they asked him to do a part, and again, you can see it up at YouTube. He was terrible. He was absolutely terrible, and they weren't able to use it, which caused the problem, because as Jerry Seinfeld once said, he actually did a scene in the show. It was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. George was naturally funny if you were around him. I was. I knew the funny side. I also knew the other side, that he was intolerable as well. I saw that side, which wasn't fun to watch. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Keith Hernandez, I was doing this talk out in Bethpage about 2 years ago, and the Mets fan said, I'm disappointed. Why? Talked about Seinfeld and didn't talk about Keith Hernandez. Seinfeld and Keith Hernandez are buddies now, but when Keith Hernandez was asked to do the show, he had no idea who Jerry Seinfeld was. Hernandez said when his agent Scott Boras, who's still in the news in 2020 this year as a player agent, when the agent Boras asked him if he wanted to be on Seinfeld, he said, what's that? Boras explained that they fly him out first class, have him in a nice hotel for a week, pay him $15 grand. Keith played himself on the show. On that particular show, Keith becomes best buddies with Jerry Seinfeld. And George Costanza is very jealous of that. Very jealous of it. The other thing, Keith smoked cigarettes in those days. And he goes out with Elaine, and Elaine likes him until he starts smoking cigarettes, and that's the end of Keith Hernandez on that particular run with Seinfeld, but he was on Seinfeld. Wally Pipp, you don't hear much about being Wally Pipped anymore. Wally Pipp was a big, big part of American culture in the 30s and 40s, because the legend was Wally Pipp was replaced by Lou Gehrig because he had a headache and he never got his job back again. Well, that was the legend. The truth was the Yankees wanted to have Lou Gehrig at first base, and he was simply better than Wally Pipp. Don't feel bad for Wally Pipp. He ended up in Detroit playing, and then ended up with the Newark Bears minor league team, made more money with Newark than he did playing with the Yankees. But there was the old saying, don't take a day off. You'll become Wally Pipp. and somebody better may take your place and you might lose your job. That happened on June 2nd, 1925, and 95 years later, most people have no idea who Wally Pipp is, but he was part of American culture for a long, long time. Don't call in sick because someone else may do your job better than you. Baseball and cigarettes had a very, very long relationship. Now, I told you about Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth, you might be able to see this on Zoom. You can't really see it when I give it live, but Babe Ruth looks like he's being electrocuted with these two guys watching him because he's doing this blindfold cigarette test. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Smoother and better, Old Gold cigarettes, not a cough in a carload. Now, Babe Ruth would die of throat cancer. He was one of the first people ever to get chemotherapy, 1947, 1948. And the Babe actually got a little better. And then he didn't get better. He slowly or quickly deteriorated and would die on August 16th, 1948. But he basically, medical science, that may have been more important than hitting 714 home runs. Always by Chesterfield, ABC. When you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you will notice is their mildness. Now, Bucky Harris, who was the world champion, 1947 New York Yankees manager, in a suit. He liked Chesterfield. Bob Elliott, who won the 1948 Most Valuable Player of the National League, he smoked Chesterfield. Ted Williams, well, Ted Williams is holding Chesterfield. Stan the Man Musial, looked like somebody knocked out his tooth and stuck a cigarette right in there. He smoked cigarettes. Now, Joe DiMaggio, he too smoked cigarettes. Guaranteed he never paid for a pack of cigarettes. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. When he retired, Phil Rizzuto said, thank God I don't have to pay for his meals anymore. And Ewell Blackwell, without a cigarette, Cincinnati Reds pitcher. ABC, always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. Chesterfield also plays one other role in the American culture. The game I talk about. It's Bobby Thompson hitting that home run off of Ralph Branca. I knew both Branca and Thompson. Both of them really nice guys. Branca's son-in-law, Bobby Valentine. I knew Branca's brother, John Branca, as well. Very, very nice family, the Brancas. One of 19 kids, I think, 19 or 17. Anyway, Thompson hits the home run. And there's a guy in Brooklyn who's recording the games because people at radio stations didn't record games, believe it or not, back in those days. Fans did. And the guy in Brooklyn is recording the game because he wants to hear Russ Hodges, the Giants announcer, cry when that guy's Brooklyn Dodgers wins the World Series or the National League pennant to go to the World Series. And the recording survived because that guy would get a hold of the Giants, say, hey, let's be a good sport about it. You can have the recording. Hodges got a hold of him, sent him a box of Chesterfields, $10. And that recording is now famous. The Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant. And Chesterfield played a role in that. Yoo-hoo! I didn't like Yoo-hoo. Chocolate water. Never liked Yoo-hoo. I mean, I like Yogi. I really like Yogi. Yogi and I had an acquaintanceship. Mickey, I could live without. Moose Gowron, I liked Moose. Moose was a really, really nice guy. Went to Arthur Murray Dance School because he needed footwork to make it to the major leagues. Casey Stengel said, you're not going to make it unless you play first base. You needed footwork. So he went to Arthur Murray, and he said, did two things for me. One is I learned the footwork that I needed to play first base. The other was, look at me. My nickname is Moose, and I became the guy on the dance floor. He would eventually meet his wife on the dance floor, all because Casey said, Casey Stengel, go to Arthur Murray so you can play first base. Elston Howard, the catcher with the New York Yankees as well, and there were other players underneath this advertisement for Yoo-hoo. I knew Joe Garagiola. Didn't know him like Yogi, but I knew Joe Garagiola. And Joe was telling me one day, he said, you know, when Yogi steps in it, he really steps in it. I'll leave it at that, but I'll give you an example. 1955, Yogi's out at a country club playing golf, and he meets the people who put Yoo-hoo out, which I thought was vile chocolate water, but a lot of people liked it. Certainly Yogi liked it as well. And Yogi meets with the Oliveri family, and they can't get Yoo-hoo distributed on the shelves. So Yogi is given the drink, and they say, well, what do you think? He liked it. Yogi's on board. All of a sudden, because Yogi's on board, Yoo-hoo is all of a sudden on all the shelves. Here's a Yogiism. One time, and this was told to me by Dave Kaplan, who ran the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, or Learning Center and Museum, until a few years ago. One time I was in the office and the phone rang when no one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi sold Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. Yogi, and I remember the batteries that took water. I'm that old. The batteries that took water. I used to put water in the batteries. Needs water only 3 times a year. Yogi Berra is selling Prestolite high-level batteries. Now, Yogi was all over the place because of a guy by the name of Frank Scott. Frank Scott was the Yankee traveling secretary, and he goes to his house, Yogi's house in Montclair, New Jersey, and somehow Frank's watch breaks. And he looks at the time and says, oh no, my watch broke. And Yogi said, I'll get you another one. I'll get you another one. Come with me. And they go to another room, and Yogi opens a drawer, and there are 100 watches in there. So take whatever you want. Where'd you get all these watches? He said, I go out, Boy Scouts, whatever, they give me a watch. Yogi, you should get paid for this. You should get a watch. And Frank Scott would become the first real agent to get endorsements. And he got Yogi all of these endorsements, and then he got Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle and other guys around the New York area. And he was the first quote-unquote super agent, and he did a lot for Yogi. Yogi selling Miller Lite, along with the Miller Lite All-Stars, John Madden, Bob Uecker, Marvelous Monarch Thornberry. I don't know why they want me in these commercials. Hey, need a Christmas gift? Yogi's got the perfect gift for you. This Christmas, ask Mom and Dad for a Shelby, the winner's bike. I like Shelby because it's the slickest, streamlined bike on the road. Tell them Yogi sent you. Yogi's teammate, Joe DiMaggio. Him with Marilyn Monroe. My friend, the late Marv Schneider, New York, Associated Press, teamed with Morris Engelberger to write a book, 300 pages about Morris and Joe, 11 pages about Marilyn and Joe. And Marv, before he had a brain swelling on the brain, used to go out and give talks on Marilyn and Joe. And I'd say, go on cruise ships, get 800 people, 750 of them being women. They said, you only have 11 pages. How'd you stretch 11 pages out? So I stretched it out. The women came out. Not that they cared about Joe. They wanted to know about Marilyn. Here they are at the Stork Club. Guarantee you, Joe didn't pay for that cigarette, nor did he pay for that drink. But Joe and Marilyn were an item. January 14th, 1954, DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe eloped in San Francisco. 10 months later, Marilyn Monroe files for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. And I was around when Joe was around, 1980s, 1990s. It was a horrible interview. It was just a horrible interview. Didn't have much to say. And Mickey Mantle also was a horrible interview, and they hated each other. Mickey and Joe absolutely hated each other. Now, here's Marilyn. That's me in Stamford, Connecticut 3 years ago. And that is 26-foot Marilyn. And she would be going around, every summer she'd go around the country on the Stamford, Connecticut tour to have her. And they decided to put her in the village square, and her rear end faced the church, the First Congregation Church. And as you walked out, The first thing you saw was her underwear and the lifted up skirt. To Marilyn's left and to my left was another church. And you got to see a side view of Marilyn. The people who went to church were not too pleased with the Stamford, Connecticut Arts Council, who placed the statue of Marilyn where you came out of the church and saw her rear end, her derriere, and you saw her side when you came out of the other church. 7-year itch. And there's a grating under there, and obviously the skirt blows up. Joltin' Joe was there that day watching the scene, and apparently didn't take too kindly to the scene. There were all kinds of stories about what happened when they went home that night, but Marilyn would file for divorce, citing cruelty shortly thereafter. And they got divorced, as a matter of course. Now, Joe wanted a few things from a wife. Wanted a stay-at-home wife. Wanted a wife that would cook him dinner. Wanted a wife who made less money than he did. Wanted a wife who wasn't a bigger star than he was. To check off all those boxes, Marilyn was not the wife for Joe D. But the story is, from what I've heard over the years, that Joe D. and Marilyn were trying to get back together in 1962 when she overdosed. And it was an overdose. She mixed alcohol and pills. And on one of my cruise voyages in 2008, I gave a talk, and I met a detective from the LAPD who was there. His sector was Judy Garland. Every Thursday night, Sid Loft and Judy Garland got into a fist fight. Judy beating up Sid Loft, and they had to break that up. Nobody wanted to go there, and she lived right near Maryland. And that was his story. He said she was just another junkie, and he stuck to that story. So they get divorced. Meanwhile, Joe is portrayed in music. There was a lot of music, an awful lot of music that featured baseball. Mrs. Robinson, we started out as Mrs. Roosevelt, the ultimate song, Where Have You Gone, Joe DiMaggio. We didn't start the fire, Billy Joel. There's Joe in there. The song, Joltin' Joe, from the 1940s. Did you see Jackie Hit That Ball, Duke Ellington? Mickey by Teresa Brewer. So there were songs, hit parade songs about baseball. And you all probably have heard Mrs. Robinson tens of thousands of times. And Johnny Blanchard, who was the third string catcher of the Yankees back in the 1960s, told me the story about Mrs. Robinson, Joe DiMaggio, and Paul Simon. Paul Simon, who wrote the story. And Joe D was none too happy with Paul Simon putting him in the song. And the song becomes a runaway hit. And here is the question. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? A nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Paul Simon. Now, they get together for dinner. And this is a story that not only Blanchard knew, but Whitey Ford knew, and a whole bunch of other of the Yankees knew. They get together for dinner. And Simon would tell the story in the Dick Cavett show eventually. So they get together for dinner. Simon had sung the national anthem with Art Garfunkel one of the years, Michael Burke years with the Yankees. So they get together, and this is Paul Simon's version of the story. I said that I didn't mean the lines literally, that I thought of him as an American hero, and that genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation and thanked me. We shook hands and said goodnight. But the Yankee player's version of the story, while the same, had a little more detail than he did on the Dick Cavett show. Joe walks in, introduced to Paul Simon. Guarantee you Paul Simon picked up the tab. And the first thing he says, what do you mean? What do you mean by this? That, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? I haven't gone anywhere. I'm here. I'm with you tonight. I just did a commercial. I haven't gone anywhere. What do you mean by this? And Paul Simon decides he's going to get intellectual, which is a mistake, getting intellectual with Joe DiMaggio. And he says, well, you know, you were 10 years old I was 10 years old when you last played in 1951. I never saw you again. I never, ever saw you again. So I wondered, where'd you go? And also, you were my hero. And there weren't too many heroes around. And Paul Simon thought about Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, name of the song originally. until Mike Nichols said, "It's Mrs. Robinson," for The Graduate, because there was a snippet of the song Graduate, so it became Mrs. Robinson when the record company said, "Make that a full record." Genuine heroes were in short supply. Eleanor Roosevelt and Ted Williams. That was it. So he landed on DiMaggio. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Paul Simon gives up and says, "Yeah, well, this is the song. Joe DiMaggio, where have you got Joe DiMaggio?" And Joe says, "Okay." They finished eating. They left. Paul paid the bill. And that was that. Dick Cavett comes up with another question, which Blanchard told me about too. Why wasn't Mickey Mantle's name used instead of DiMaggio? Well, according to Blanchard, the story he heard was all about when Mickey asked him, and Blanchard was friendly with Mickey, it was all about him saying, "Mickey Mantle doesn't sound as good as Joe DiMaggio." Paul Simon told Dick Cavett, "It's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are." Story behind why Joe DiMaggio, who hated Mickey Mantle, he was jealous. Mantle was younger, beautiful looking man, blonde hair, sculptured. Mantle, part of the earth. Joe D was on his way out in 1951. Mantle hated him because he thought that during the 1951 World Series against the Giants, that Joe loafed on the ball. Mickey had all the speed in the world and trips over a sprinkler. The Yankee Stadium outfield, tears up his knee, and he was never the same. He blamed DiMaggio for that. That's Terry Cashman, my old buddy Terry Cashman. He and I share the same periodontist. Terry is coming out with a Jim Croce retrospective soon. He produced all of Jim Croce's music. But he's a former minor league baseball pitcher with the Detroit Tiger organization, lasted 2 years. And in the 80s, he came out with the Talking Baseball series, Terry Cashman. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke was his big song, and there's something missing in that picture. There's Duke Snider on the left. There's something missing in the middle. Willie Mays on the right, along with the mix. Joe DiMaggio is airbrushed out of this picture. Why? Because he's not in the song Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. 1981 song written and performed by Terry Cashman. Joe DiMaggio's not in the song. He's not in the sleeve, the record sleeve. Cashman would go on to become baseball's balladeer, writing songs about all the franchises through the 1980s, and a heck of a nice guy, a really, really nice guy, Terry Cashman. And there's the Scooter, Phil Rizzuto. I knew Scooter. Be funny, Phil. I can't. I don't know why everybody thinks I'm funny when I'm not funny. There is Phil with the gold record, Meatloaf's Paradise on dashboard by the dashboard light, and the album Bat Out of Hell. There's Phil holding a bat. Phil's the only guy in baseball's Hall of Fame and with a gold record. Yeah, I knew Meatloaf. Meatloaf I knew him from various places, including coaching his daughter's softball team here in Westchester. And we were talking about that one day, and I said, "What was it like working with Scooter?" He said, "It was awful." So why was it awful? He said, "He walks in, and we want him to be Phil Rizzuto on this record. And he's not being Phil Rizzuto. He's taking this seriously. And we're telling him, Phil," and it was done up in Boston in the studio, "Phil, just be Phil. Just be yourself." And he's actually reading this thing as if on Paradise by the Dashboard Light, as if, he's an actor. Finally, they convince him, just be Phil. Now, you might remember the song. It's been played for 42 years. Rizzuto provides a play-by-play broadcast of this guy and this girl in a car, and the guy wants to hit a home run that night, cleaning it up, and the girl isn't too sure. And she's asking him, "Will you love me for the rest of your life?" and all this other stuff. And Rizzuto is, he gets on first base and gets the second. That boy can really fly. He's on third base, and there's a suicide squeeze. He's on his way home. There's a play at the plate, and he makes it. Okay, that's the song. Scooter. Scooter's up in Boston. These kids are going to university in Boston. And the kids say, hey, Phil, Dad, you realize that song was about sex. Man, Uncle Barry, he never told me it was about sex. Same guy. Same guy is on the broadcast with Bill White one day. Same guy, Channel 11. And I knew Bill White as well. And Bill White said, yeah, whatever the picture, he's got good rhythm tonight. And Scooter was, Cora and I used the rhythm method. Bill got out of that. Bill got out of a lot of situations with Phil Rizzuto. In fact, I saw a little after Phil died, and I said to Bill, I said, I heard that you went to see him at the adult center, senior home. He said, yeah, I did. He said he's in a much better place than he was then. Yogi would go see him 3 times a week at the adult center. Where is that? Baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards. 1963. Viola Charles is my 3rd grade teacher. And Viola Charles did not want us to have our baseball cards, me and everybody else. It's the 1964 cards. So I was in 3rd grade in 1963 and 64. Takes our cards away. Never gives them back. I'm in Roseland, New Jersey, talking to an adult assisted living facility. And I'm upset about my baseball cards. My baseball cards have been taken away. There's a woman sitting at the end, slinking in her seat. And I'm looking at her. I said, did you take my cards away? She said, but I had to do it. You had to do it? I was 8 years old. I had to do it. You took cards away from, I'm 8 years old. You took my cards away. Well, you see, I was going out with a guy and he had a 6-year-old kid. He had a 6-year-old kid and I was trying to make him, I wanted him to like me. I figured by giving him the baseball cards, he'd like me. He'd like you? 5 cents, 5 cards, bubble gum. My oral surgeon and my periodontist, thank you, Cy Berger. Cy Berger invented the modern baseball card because he put the gum in there and the gum was like biting into this, like biting into that. I said, so, you couldn't spend the nickel. Couldn't spend the nickel. Got done with it too. So what happened? He dumped me. He dumped you? Kid didn't like me. No wonder the kid didn't like you. He stole my baseball cards, trying to give it to him, trying to buy his affection. Don't eat with her tonight. She stole my baseball cards. The baseball cards. Mothers threw out baseball cards. Gotten to so many of these talks when I've done baseball. And I've heard sons of mothers complaining about they threw out $60,000 worth of baseball cards. They threw my cards out. They threw my cards out. When I went away to the Army, this is 1950s, 1960s, worst story I ever heard was Johnny Padres, who pitched with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Pitched him to the World Series championship. He got a Corvette as the best player on the field. He's tooling around his Corvette in Brooklyn. He goes up, this is prior to all the highways being built. He tools up to Glens Falls on Route 9, honking at everybody, shows his father the car, says, take good care of the car because I'm going to come back from the Army Reserve, because she did Army Reserve in the 1950s. It worked out. You could do Army Reserve for 4 months. And I'm driving down to Vero Beach. Well, he goes back to Glens Falls to pick up all his stuff to go down to Dodger Camp 1956. And for the 56 season, stops by his father's house, says, Dad, how do you like the car? He says, it's great. Let's go see it. There's a station wagon there. And Johnny Padres says, look, what happened to my Corvette? Oh, I traded it in. It was a useless car. We need the station wagon. The car is worth about $200,000 today. That's the worst story I heard. Anyway, the baseball card can teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. If you wanted a guy's statistics, you wanted batting average, or if you wanted earned run average or team percentage, on the back of the baseball card, you just added totals to it. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Baseball cards also were your entry to most people into gambling. And how'd you gamble? Well, you flip. Yeah, you did that, or you did that. Oh, got to get it higher. No, got to get it higher. You did that, flipped your cards, or you did that, or you did that. Form of gambling. You had to learn strategy with some of your baseball cards, how to flip or how to trade baseball cards. So you gambled with your baseball cards. You also learned geography if you wanted to. Where was Pittsburgh? Where was Cincinnati? You could look, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and then get your map. Oh yeah, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there. They were also great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in, you had the cards whirl around. They sounded great as bicycle flaps. Kids today, they don't play around with baseball cards the way I did and my peers did in the 1960s and prior to that in the 1950s. Baseball cards are passe now. Unfortunately, as we wrap up here, no new songs, no new literature. There are some new movies that come out, but they aren't classic movies anymore. Pride of the Yankees is, whether you like it or not, still a classic movie. Moneyball has a chance to be a classic movie. It's just another sport. The question, is Homer Simpson in baseball's Hall of Fame? Yes or no? Anybody want to guess at that? Just put it in chat. That is me and Homer Simpson and Marge and Maggie and Lisa and Bart down in Florida. I'll give you 5 more seconds to answer whether or not Homer Simpson's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Answer, yes, he's in baseball's Hall of Fame because of that 1992 cartoon in a little separate area not connected to baseball. Along with the poem, Casey at the Bat, John Fogerty's Center Field from 1985, the film League of Their Own, and of course, Abbott Costello, who's on first. Baseball by 1965 no longer was America's pastime. Football had overtaken it. And that is me with the darkish curly hair talking to Joe Namath with the straight curly wig and the visor, and my buddy Bruce Morton, who no longer has the beard. Behind him, Weeb Eubank, coach of the 1968-69 Super Bowl champions. He's right behind Bruce there, New York Jets. And of course, Namath changed football, made the Super Bowl a national holiday. And that happened in 1969. Baseball took second seat to football by 1969. In 1950, it was baseball, horse racing, boxing that dominated American sports, American culture. How many horse racing movies were there? How many boxing movies were there? And the baseball movies. By 1965, football surpassed baseball. The boxing movies. This guy could not say boxing. When he left boxing in 1982, boxing never recovered. Muhammad Ali, that's me and Ali in 1985. By this point, unfortunately, Muhammad Ali didn't really communicate all that well as the Parkinson's kicked in. Horse racing for the most part is being saved by casinos. They're called racinos, slot machines at the racetrack. And in 2021 here in New York, very well, Yonkers Raceway, Empire City Raceway could disappear. The Rooney family sold to MGM Grand the raceway, and the 10-year agreement to keep racing going for slot machines through New York State ends in 2021. And I don't think MGM Grand bought Yonkers Raceway because they want to keep horse racing going. That's me and Jim Bouton. Veronica probably has the book or his books in the library, Ball 4, which came out in 50 years ago. In June of 1970, Jim Bouton humanized players in his book, Ball 4, talked about all kind of funny things. Bouton and I had a relationship over the years. According to the New York Public Library, it was one of the 20 most influential books, nonfiction books, of the 20th century, and I'm sure Veronica has the book in the library. It was used as part of the arbitration when Peter Sykes ended the reserve clause. Soccer, that's me, a soccer movie called Sons of Ben in 2015 about a a bunch of lunatics, literally lunatics. They'll tell you they were lunatics, who wanted a Major League Soccer team in Philadelphia and went to all kinds of lengths to convince Major League Soccer that Philadelphia should have a team. I'm in that documentary. Thought they were going to hiss and boom it because I didn't deliver their message, but they were cool. And I'm still friendly with some of the people that I met that night in 2015. Ain't over until it's over. It's true. It ain't over until it's over. Mike Dyer is a guy I've known for probably 40 years now. And Mike Dyer in 1973 was a writer with the Long Island Press. And the New York Mets struggled that year. A lot of their players injured. Seaver's injured. Grody's injured. That was the year that M. Donald Grant went into the clubhouse and yelled how the Mets should be better. And Tug McGraw started screaming, "You gotta believe, you gotta believe, you gotta believe." It's September, and the season is coming to an end. And Mets hang in there. Nobody's run away with the National League East, and they're pretty close. They get on a hot streak, but they lose a game. The team loses a game at Shea Stadium. It's everybody's around Yogi after the game, asking questions of Yogi. And Mike Dyer looks at Yogi. You're going to be disappointed when you hear this story. This is not a great story here. He looks at Yogi Berra and he says, "Is it over?" Yogi says, "It ain't over till it's over." Yogi Berra has been quoted more than anybody else in the history of the United States Supreme Court. Yogi and I had a relationship. I wouldn't call it a friendship, I call it a relationship. I really cherished my relationship with Yogi. He was such a nice guy. And people, and I'll tell you how nice a guy he was. When people came to New York to see me, I'd pick them up at the airport. They'd come over to my house and I'd say, let's go somewhere. "Oh, good, we're going out to eat." I said, "Well, not quite." "Where are we going?" "I'm not going to tell you." We drive over to Montclair, New Jersey. And we get in the parking lot. This is Yogi Berra's museum. I said, "Yeah." "What are we doing here?" I said, "Shut up. Get out of the car." "Well, there's the entrance." Let's go in the back. Knock on the door. Yogi opens the door and these people are, "Huh? That's Yogi? That's Yogi." Really nice guy. It's the last time I was with Yogi, speaking at the museum. That's Brian Cashman, the Yankee general manager. This is June 26, 2011. There were some changes afterwards at the museum, and Yogi fell into, his health wasn't good anymore. He had fallen, and he eventually would go into an assisted living residence. But Yogi was one hell of a nice guy. And I will leave you with this. I'll leave you with this. Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. Yogi talking to his wife, Carmen. "Carmen, Dale went to go see Dr. Zhivago today. What's wrong with him today?" It gets early late out there, talking about left field at Yankee Stadium. And of course, it ain't over till it's over. But it's over. Thank Veronica for inviting me. I hope everybody enjoyed our little stroll down memory lane. And if you want, I will answer some questions, or if you have any comments, go ahead and feel free.
I've turned allow to talk on for everybody. You will still have to unmute yourself on your end. I am going to go ahead and stop recording now, so your questions will